Hello and welcome to the New Way podcast, where we break down pop culture so you don't have to. You may have noticed we did not open this episode with our usual intro and theme song. That's because today's show is going to be a little bit different than our usual episodes. As we speak, the world around us is in pain. A month ago, a man named George Floyd was murdered by a policeman while that officer's fellow cops stood by and did nothing. Floyd repeatedly cried, "I can't breathe," which sounded very familiar for anyone that remembered Eric Garner's Same Please in 2014. And Floyd's death brought around a absolutely monumental renewed vigor in an important movement called the Black Lives Movement, which I'm sure you have heard of. Now, typically our podcast focuses on pop culture. We don't get super political and we don't get super social, but we felt it was going to be beneficial to our audience and to ourselves to maybe engage in a conversation about what's going on with the Black Lives Matter movement in hopes that maybe our audience can understand the necessity of this movement.
That's not even to say that it's political. I think a lot of people would say that it's not political. That's the problem. When you make it political, it makes it harder to accept what this is, which is dismantling of a systemic racism in our society that has been here for a long time, and that we should have taken meaningful steps to dismantle it well before 2020. But that's kind of like a place of privilege to come to that realization in and of itself. But that being said, some other podcasts, we talked about this off air. A lot of other podcasts are kind of going as either business as usual, or they're choosing to address it and talk about what's going on. And I knew that the New Way, and I speak for all of our hosts, we wanted to talk about this, and we realized that our base, our listeners are predominantly white too. So if their social media feeds aren't getting a lot of this for whatever reason, it's a voice that they need to hear, and they need to understand what's happening here, because defund the police and the Black Lives Matter movement is being portrayed very differently across state lines, depending on what network you tune into. So it's really, what you're seeing could very well be what a network or what a state government is telling people to think. So.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, Nick. We don't, we have a large, not a large following. We have a varied following, I would say.
Our 12 followers who just want to make sure
followers are out there. But yeah, we don't really know what everyone is seeing on this, and if some people are not on social media at all. I know we have listeners out there that have years ago gotten rid of Facebook and Twitter and everything, and so yeah, it is something we think we're in a unique position maybe to help give this conversation to people that might not otherwise have it.
I can't wait to get rid of Facebook. I can't wait to get rid of Facebook.
I always threaten, but I never quite pull the trigger on that one.
If there's going to be a year to get rid of Facebook, it's 2020.
Yeah. Now we have two guests I'm super happy to have on the show today. We have Cal Charles and Cal's sister, Winzie Wilson. Thank you guys for joining us today.
Thank you for the invite. Happy to be here.
Now, Cal and I, we worked together for 5 grueling years at a place that longtime listeners of this show will find familiar, Native Remedies, or as Nick has always called it, Leah Remedies. And we became friends during that time, and a lot happened over that 5 years. We saw George Zimmerman acquitted for the murder of Trayvon Martin. We saw the shooting of Michael Brown that led to the Ferguson protests. And we mentioned earlier Eric Garner, the death of Eric Garner. These were all things that were happening during that period between 2010 and 2011 and 2016 or so, when we were working together. There were a lot of things happening. Now, Cal and I didn't necessarily always talk about social issues. We a lot of times just complained about work. But Cal was always kind of a bright spot in the office. He would some people found it a little bit weird that he would come singing and whistling at like 8 a.m. in the morning, first thing in the morning, and it was a little bit grating every day, but Cal and I, we really developed a friendship over kind of just having very frank conversations about a lot of things, and that's where I learned about Cal's ministry. And I had a very religious upbringing, so we talked a lot about that. But I think when I really became very impressed with Cal as a person is in 2014. Cal spoke at an annual celebration for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and he performed a piece called "Keeping the Dream Alive." And I remember specifically this instance because it was shared around our office, and I asked if we could post it on our company's Facebook. Because we occasionally would do kind of employee related things that we would put up on our Facebook. So I remember that was a really big deal and thankfully, our office was completely behind that. And so we did, we actually posted that clip up on our corporate page. And it was really kind of amazing. And I think that's really where I started to kind of see the kind of person you are, Cal. And it made it really fun to continue to be friends with you and talk to you. And your love of activism and speaking, I think, made you a perfect candidate to come on this show. A month ago, I reached out to a lot of my friends to find out how they were doing between the pandemic and what's going on with the movement. So we talked, for a couple of days, and you gave me some book recommendations, which we're definitely going to get to here. But yeah, the whole time after I spoke with you, that's kind of what I was hoping to bring to this. Is it was a really good conversation. It was a hard conversation. It wasn't a fun, our most fun conversation that we've had, but I thought it was really beneficial. And Cal said he agreed to come on, and he said he asked if he could bring Winzie. Now, Winzie, you are the youngest person we've had on our show because I'm an old man. I'm not quite as young as Cal. He's quite a young man here, and Nick. Excuse me, but I think we don't have a really great youth perspective necessarily always in the show, so I'm excited about that. Winzie just graduated from Boynton Beach Community High School, and you received the KSJ scholarship, so congratulations. As we said earlier, I could talk to you about what it's like to graduate during the time of COVID, and maybe that'll be another episode at some point because I'm super fascinated with that. But yeah, I'm really excited to have you guys on here. So without further ado, I think we can get into the episode. We don't really have a roadmap for how this is going to go, but there was one question that popped in my head that
Matt.
Yeah, I know. There's one question that that popped in my head immediately that I thought was important to ask. And I think Cal, you can kind of lead off with this one, and I want to hear Winzie as well. I don't know if a lot of our audience is familiar with what I mean by the talk, and maybe you can explain exactly what that is. But when did you first have the talk with your parents?
That is a very interesting question. And first of all, let me say thank you both to Nick and Matt and the other co-hosts for doing this. I think it's an important conversation to have, but more importantly, to have it across racial boundaries. And that's how we will begin to make progress. As the episode goes on, I think we'll discover my optimism towards that, which may slightly have deviated from the day of when I gave the speech for Dr. Martin Luther King celebration just 6 years ago. But we'll see. We'll talk. And I think having these conversations are important. More importantly, taking steps after them are equally important, if not probably the most important thing to do. As far as the talk, it is very interesting you mentioned that, because when you indicated earlier this week that that's where we were going to start our conversation, I looked at your text message. I looked at your text message, and I checked my brain, checked the catalogs, and tried to pull up that file where the talk actually occurred. And then I talked to my sister. I was like, when did we have this conversation? I'll let her speak for herself. But contrary to popular belief, not every single household, I think, or at least in my generation, I'm a little bit younger than Matt, as he's already indicated, plus or minus 7 years, who's counting? But anyway, inside joke, guys.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, there was never really an official talk where my dad or my mom or my grandmother or my grandfather, gave us that speech about how you interact with the police. It was always something that was understood, and I think it's something innate, to use a word to describe it, that you're almost born with, and I think that says a lot about society, about culture, and things of that nature. There's actually a book, It Didn't Start With You, which might suggest that what I'm saying is 100% true, that there are certain things that you do, certain character traits that you possess that just happen because of genealogy or history or things of that nature. But there was never an official talk that when you get pulled over, that you make sure you say, yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, or that you are 100% compliant with the instructions of the police officer. So for those who aren't familiar with it, this is not the birds and bees talk we're talking about. We're referring to how African Americans or black and brown people interact with law enforcement or the justice system in general. I will say this, oddly enough, during our period of working together, the Trayvon Martin incident occurred. And it was during that time that I actually had gone to Orlando for a wedding. And slightly after that, which we know Trayvon was shot in the Sanford, Florida area, which isn't too far from the Orlando area, if my geography serves me correct. And after the wedding, we went back to the hotel, we chilled for a bit. And at that time in my life, I was a little bit more into the nightlife, not so much these days. Grateful for pandemics. And so I'm leaving out of my hotel, and obviously I'm in a rental car. And within about a minute of me pulling out, I see a police officer pull up behind me. Didn't throw his lights on immediately. And I was on the phone with a friend, I'm pretty sure I was. And I was like, okay, we know where this is going. Because, fine, you get right behind me immediately. And we're like, okay, you're still there. If you're there about more than a quarter of a mile, you're probably running my place. This is getting ready to become an adventurous night, or at least a little bit angst is developing. And that was true then. So he pulls, the lights come on, and I'm sitting there waiting to see what illegal thing I've done now. He sits in the car for a second, then eventually he comes over, asks me who I am, where I'm going. I was extremely open and honest with him at the time. I was on my way to a club. Probably shouldn't have been that honest, but whatever. Nevertheless, had not been drinking, so I was good. And then within about 2 to 3 minutes, there were easily another 4 police cars. You would have thought that they had pulled over the, Orlando drug pen or something. I have no idea. But nevertheless, that went on for a few minutes. And in this moment, I knew I had done nothing wrong. I wasn't carrying anything, didn't smell of weed or anything along those lines. Then eventually, there's some police officers standing on either side of the vehicle. And he said, we pulled you over because this is a nice car, and that area where you came from is known for seedy activities. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, thank you, Clayton. I did not book this hotel, but my godfather, that is. And you're in a car that's not yours. So there were these triggers in their mind, which if you read the book, and so we'll get there later, that justified me being pulled over. And then further justified me having the car searched in that moment. And I'm sitting here, okay, it's like 6, 7 police officers. They're going through the trunk of the car and everything. And I'm like, okay, this is exciting. And again, I wasn't overly concerned in the sense that I'm going to get arrested because they're going to find something, but like, we really have dialed it up several notches for someone who you admit did not break the law at this point. We're just on a fishing expedition. So moments like that, and then you hear stories that happen with family members or friends, I think 100% contribute to perspective, thoughts, feelings, attitudes about police officers. There's this meme floating around, and I don't want to reduce this conversation to a meme or anything like that, but you don't hear anyone saying, fuck the fire department. Not sure if that's permitted on this show.
That 100% is. Okay.
Just let me not sure if we're G-rated or R-rated, but and there's a level of that's true because you never run into issues with the fire department per se. So that's my story.
And Cal, you see that not just in memes, but you see that on placards at the protests. I mean, that has transcended a meme because there is a real truth to that.
Absolutely.
Well, it is sort of true. It's sort of strange that in our generation or any generations happening right now in the social media thing, memes are sort of those are our written legacy. It's sad to say that is true, but it is true. Those are the sound bites that are going to carry on. And I think the ones that are really important, some things transcend a meme and a hashtag, and they become something more meaningful. It's kind of interesting.
Absolutely.
Now, what about you, Winzie? Have you had? I'm sure you've dealt with something similar to what Cal's talking about, because he said you guys didn't really have the talk.
No, definitely not. Like, it's something that you like when you're black, you're told to be stuff, but you're not taught to be that stuff. And if you can't get on with it, then you're not going to survive this. You just got to, you just come out the womb and you have to be prepared. But to piggyback on what he was saying, about, the song Fuck the Police by NWA, for a long time in your life, especially when you're young and black, there's certain stuff you go through and you feel disconnected and think it's only you. But when music is something that's very binding in the black community. So when you turn on the music and you hear people on the West Coast saying they're going through the same thing, people in the South going through the same thing, and people going on the North in the same thing, it's like, I'm not crazy. Like, being black, no matter if you're in a more liberal state, you're still treated like you're in the rural parts of the South. So we never had the talk. It's never like sit down with your parents. But if you get pulled over by the police, you need to sit back and be quiet. So there's no talk really for anything in the black community. We don't talk about a lot of issues because we were just taught to survive, even from slavery. You don't speak. You just do as told, and you go on with what's going on. There's no talk.
That's a fascinating point you bring up about the music, and I think that's such an interesting thing to think about. Again, we were talking about what breeds culture and what breeds unification and bringing people together. That that song was such a controversial song at the time. It was a huge issue, and everyone was just very, very adamant on both sides of that argument. And it's really, I don't think a lot of people were able to get that perspective that you're giving. That this was one of the few times that someone put something out there that was a truth that you have all known as a community, that the other communities are completely either disbelieving or adamantly say does not exist, does not happen. And you're like, finally, I'm not alone. I think that's it's something that's interesting. I don't know if you guys can speak to this. So I was thinking about this the other day about music specifically. As we, in the 60s and the 70s, there was a lot of activism in music. There was lots of anti-Vietnam War. There was really a culture of music being used to talk about what was happening, talk about injustices, usually against the system. This is what's happening out there, what we do. I don't see as much of that in our current time, but I'm also not
Childish Gambino, Kendrick, Run the Jewels.
I see some, right? And I'm also the worst person to talk about music. As
I think that's really what
she actually is better than I am at this, so which is one of the reasons I wanted to have her on this. Sorry to interrupt that. She can definitely speak to the pop culture era, or side of this thing. So I'm going to be quiet on this subject.
The only thing I knew Childish Gambino and a little bit of Kendrick Lamar. That's about it. That's literally where probably the end of my knowledge base. That's not indicative of how much is out there. But do you feel that you're getting the same kind of things that like you talked about when you hear NWA as a child? Are you getting that same kind of stuff from the community now?
Oh, definitely. I definitely do feel that same connection, because even when you look up, just like with NWA was controversial, the Lemonade album by Beyonce was controversial. That nearly got taken off a Billboard. Kendrick Lamar's performance at the Grammy was stripped off of YouTube. You can't find it. So I'm probably getting more liberation with the new generation because there's more education in the music, and that's really what people fear for, than I got with NWA. Because NWA, there's times where Black people just gotta get together and we just gotta talk our talk. Like, that's what that was. You listen to it, coming straight from the underground. But then you hear Kendrick Lamar giving you statistics and throwing punchlines in there that got you thinking. And then you go to thinking, you go to researching, you go to research, you go to reading, you go feeling like, oh no, I have to do something about this. The music today galvanizes you. You're just not blowing off steam. So there's definitely a lot of music out there that caters to, edify your mind. But it doesn't stay out there for long, because you'll go up and it's flat on YouTube, or you can't find it anymore, or it's censored off the radio.
You can go to Spotify and see in the cities where there are large scale protests, the numbers go way up. for certain artists, and Kendrick is always like the number one spike in the cities. There was something that I read about that. You can see what's being listened to depending on where you are.
And that's crazy to me to hear about these things being stripped, especially when, you know, there's a large community right now talking about cancel culture and getting very upset about, you know, where they're canceling everything, they're taking all these things off. You're talking about legitimate art that has meaning and purpose that's being taken down for, I don't even know what the excuse or the potential reasoning is behind it, other than it's bringing you together, and it's and taking that away is a way to take that away from you. It's to punish, and that's, I mean, it's heartbreaking. And I think, you know, and cancel culture is something that I think we can talk about on here as well, because, you know, there's a point at which, especially if you're a fan of comedy and of certain things, that you start you find yourself in that terrible wrong side of the argument of like, but do we really need to get rid of this? But do we, and making excuses. And what I think is kind of fascinating to see right now is a lot of people are now just proactively getting out there and removing anything
turning it off,
and it's awesome. Like, and it should not. I think there's so many people that are getting upset about that, and it's like, no, it's,
well, if we cancel everybody who's done something shitty, then we can't like anything. That's about right. Yes.
Yeah, it's yeah. I mean, when you see, you know, and I like, I mean, it's not, and this is not just like, I mean, this is all kinds of things, from 30 Rock removing 4 or 5 episodes to Brooklyn Nine-Nine that is literally scrapped their entire season that they were writing, that's going to be coming back on air because they're like, we can't, the direction we were going just doesn't fit with what's happening right now.
And that's slightly different. That's not someone, an episode in blackface that they're taking down retroactively. That is a thoughtful consideration to, like, we're a show about cops. We need to not go ahead with the 4 episodes that are in the can, and we need to more thoughtfully think about how we're going to navigate this season. I think that deserves more credit than like grouping that in with cancel culture.
This is true.
Yeah, I agree with you, Nick. And there was one day, I think like 2 weeks ago, where I'm scrolling through my social media and see, this show's canceled, this show's canceled, this show's canceled. I'm like, wow, there's a lot happening. And from my perspective, it's like, I see what we're doing. I, you know, appreciate what's happening. And this is maybe it's generational, because Winzie and I were talking about it just yesterday, I think. And she was 100% here for the cancel. Supports it 100%. Not to speak for you, she can speak for herself. She's right there. And whereas I'm not that I wasn't against that, not that I wasn't for it, but it was more of like, okay, are we moving too fast? But when you think about it, it's been 400 plus years of, you know, putting forth an image or crafting a system that cater to allow events like George Floyd and Trayvon Martin and Eric Garner and all the countless others that we don't even hear about. So I kind of see it, and I think Nick brought up a great point. I definitely have more respect for those companies that are a little bit more proactive about it, that are changing, as opposed to, you know, someone who says something in an interview or does something, and now we're coming back and apologizing just because it's been seen. Well, no, you really said what you meant, I think. So I'm going to go with what you said the first time. But yeah.
Winzie, why are you happy? Why are you like, if Cal said is on par here, because I think that I'm leaning more towards this is symbolic. We've been, you know, had problems with shows in the past, and networks have dug in their heels, and ultimately there's a backlash, and then nothing happens. So to me, I don't know. Why do you think that that's a good thing? I think that I'm on the same side of the fence.
First and foremost, with this whole cancel culture, I was telling somebody today, like, first of all, who approved all these canceled people? I don't remember approving them.
Yeah.
Like, so if they cancel, it'll make a difference to me, because you were never approved in my book. But the cancel culture, what it does is it holds people accountable. And I feel like at the same time, people are canceling because they're trying to replant seeds. So the next generation of kids that grow up and use the media and TV to navigate their lives is not what we have been seeing for the last couple of decades. So yes, cancel it. Make the example out of people, so they know that there's a standard when they are certain people, when they are celebrities. There's a standard you need to uphold. And just because you are a celebrity and you have a certain amount of clout, that doesn't excuse you from all the other world that's not celebrity. So Yes, cancel them and go in the corner and think about what you did.
Yeah, well, yeah,
And when
it's
you talk about canceling someone in the argument, like, well, everybody's on something. You can go through tweets for 5 years and find something and cancel everybody, and we won't have anybody left to like. Well, yeah, that's kind of the point. When you talk about planting the new seeds, that is the point. Run everybody out. Let's start a new culture, and let's start a new class of celebrity where there's not going to be a problem. And it starts. It's way bigger than just canceling one person. It's what Winzie said. It's what's going to happen in the next generation of celebrity.
A new mindset, creating a new system. Yeah.
What bothers me is like when I hear like, oh, so and so said the N-word or so and so put on blackface. It's like I think about going to my Black childhood, and if I could sit next to my mama and sing Uncle Luke and not say a cuss word, you can go on national TV as a white person and not say the N-word. If I could go into rooms and conform myself to appease white people, you can do the same thing. So it's not everybody's done something stupid, everybody's done something silly. That's not stupid or silly, because I'm told off that this is what you do when you get in the store. This is what you do. If you're a celebrity, it shouldn't be that hard. And that's with no eyes looking at me. The true test of character is how you act when nobody is around. So once you show your true colors and that's who you are, it just like, okay, there's the privilege. Cancel. Don't think about what you did.
Yeah.
And that's a fantastic point. That you don't have the choice. So everyone always talks about this. Oh, but it's unfair. It was 10 years ago. It was whatever. I couldn't get. And it's like, yeah, because they have a choice. They up to this point they've had the option to do that and get away with it, and there have been no repercussions. Now there are.
It's
repercussions.
crazy to me when I see Jimmy. Not Jimmy Fallon. I'm gonna get the Jimmys mixed up. Kimmel, right? You see Kimmel as Karl Malone, and then Adam Carolla coming to the defense of it wasn't blackface. It was a specific impression of Karl Malone. Like the semantics of it and the bending over backwards to defend.
Yeah.
It's so cringy. It's so much worse than like getting in an uproar about cancel culture.
Yeah, and I think I think how it's handled is also incredibly important as well, because I believe there should be times to learn and times not to. I mean, that's
and
not,
Kimmel has learned, and I think that
Yeah.
a lot of people would agree he's a different person, but like, watch the
reaction,
video.
Yeah, and that reaction bothered me too, because it is someone that I tend to have has watched that person progress and actively become a better person, and you see them not able to. Like, it doesn't matter. The intention doesn't matter. And I think that's the thing that is missed most often is, no, I don't feel that he thought he was doing something bad or terrible or hurtful to anyone out there. But you have to recognize that not everyone views it that way. And Winzie, what you said, the idea that you have to censor yourself from swearing around your mom, which is something every single human being can identify with, in addition to the other ways you have to censor yourself in a larger scale socially because of the color of your skin. I think that's a huge point to make, to say, yeah, we have it easy. The idea that you did this and it wasn't an issue, and now it is, like, just own up to it. And that was what was, we talked about this on our show a little bit about, Jimmy Fallon and Jimmy Kimmel both come under attack for the same thing. I happen to like one of them better than the other, but oddly enough, Jimmy Fallon, who I'm not as big a fan of, had 100% the correct reaction to this. And I thought what was really impressive to say, and I don't want to give
both
too much
Jimmys did
praise.
it. That's insane. Also,
Yeah, it is
like
very
both
crazy.
both major late night talk show hosts, same Jimmy, both done this. Like that's insane.
What I think is what is more important to be even thinking about these things, because so the ones getting canceled in this situation, the ones that are attacked, are Jimmy Fallon, Jimmy Kimmel. They are not the only people involved in bringing that sketch to air. That is, and one of them is on Saturday Night Live, where Lorne Michaels lords over every single word that is spoken on that show. There is a network behind that sketch. There's a network that put that sketch on their streaming platforms as recently as 6 months ago. There were writers, there were producers, there was a crowd of people there that didn't angrily get on social media after they saw it and complain about it.
No hashtags generated from it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right?
And I think that is, I think that is the next step in this in saying that yes, there are going to be people that are the face of these accusations and of this cancel thing. I think we're going to get to a point where it's saying, listen, this is a whole group of people, and everyone is going to be accountable moving forward. So like, you had your fun, hope it was worth it. And that's the other side. Like, how many of these things are worth going to your grave for, putting up a fight to save? That's the other side. Like Jimmy Kimmel cares about saving his Karl Malone sketch from 20 years ago that no one would even get or care about
And
now.
look, if their career, if they make a martyr out of their career, and they really care about the Black Lives Matter movement, then throwing away their career to be an example for the future seeds should be worth it to them. And that's kind of the only position that you can take. And when you talk about like a network or a company, you see all of a sudden, you see companies, high profile companies, posting on social media, using the hashtag, right? And when I talk to people, they think that it's just the other shoe's going to drop. It's just a matter of time before it fades away, and it's not part of their company mission when it's not trending. And that's why
I'm really curious to see how long this lasts. I am really sorry to interrupt you, Nick, but I am curious to see how long this lasts. As a matter of fact, when the protests around the country started happening, I said to Winzie, I was like, this feels different. It feels different. We were riding in the car one day. I said, this feels different. I said, if this is still going on by Wednesday, I think it was like a Thursday or Friday when we had this conversation. I said, if this is still happening by Wednesday, we may be on to something. We may be getting ready to get a shift in this country. And Wednesday has come and gone, I think, twice now, maybe 3 times. And to this day, there are still protests happening. And we're beginning to see some changes occur. But to Nick's point, I think I'm curious to see how long it stays that way, and if we make tangible, palpable, and relevant changes. It's one thing to release a statement. It's another thing to pull something from years ago off television or off streams or things like that. But what do you do going forward? How do you really advance the movement, help the movement, and improve society? Curious to see what happens.
White people have to keep being uncomfortable.
Correct.
I think that's the key. Like, the second they're comfortable again, that side of the activism is lost. That there's no money getting made for companies that are supporting Black Lives Matter. There's no momentum for communities of white people that will just get complacent again and slip back into the privilege. I think that's when you talk about something feeling different. That's what feels different to me. Is people are waking up and a lot of them are ashamed about it, but yeah, being uncomfortable and getting called on it is part of it. And I know that's a reckoning that I came to this year, that I thought I was an ally and a good person, and I was not for so long. So now what? What's the next step?
And it's kind of awesome, because this is sort of going in sort of the idea of some of the questions I had here. And it's two things really, I think, to think about, kind of moving to the next part of this topic. One is really interesting is, a movement is catching on when LinkedIn is becoming a social activism platform. And I'm dead serious about that, because they have all these companies that are coming out.
LinkedIn.
Procter and Gamble specifically had this big ad campaign that happened the last couple of weeks or whatever. And it was getting a lot of praise and a lot of steam as being very pro Black Lives Matter. And then LinkedIn pops up a photo of the board for Procter and Gamble.
Yep.
And man, did you watch a shift? Like, if you want to talk about cancel culture, a complete paradigm shift. That's happening on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is the last bastion of old safe social media. And I think that's the first question I want to ask you guys, is that
Cut to Ben and Jerry hacking the LinkedIn database. The only other company that's
it is crazy. And I'm watching, like, I briefly worked for a vape company, so I have a ton of cannabis businesses and business owners and stuff on there, and it's running rampant through that community. Is kind of interesting, because the cannabis culture likes to think that it's so evolved and welcoming and all this stuff, and then people are shining a light very much and being like, no, it isn't. And some of these companies that are taking they're like, oh, look at how diverse we are. People are going, yeah, you guys like within a last year like shifted around, and all of a sudden, but like not the main people that own your company, not the main people that make the money. You have a lot of faces out there, but those aren't the people that are actually the decision makers and the ones benefiting from what you're doing.
I think it's something like 10% is black owned across the nation for dispensaries. And then when you talk about racism that white people don't even really think about, during the pandemic, cannabis dispensaries became an essential business. They were open when very, very many businesses were not open. They were deemed essential. And yet, the amount of people that are in jail for minor cannabis charges, and the large majority of them people of color, to me, an essential business running and being taxed while that's happening. For profit prison. I mean, it's just...
Same thing is true with John Boehner, Speaker of the House, former Speaker of the House, railed against marijuana. Now he's lobbying for them, making millions of dollars doing it, and has yet to come out and right his wrongs. Not that he ever could, but call him out on his hypocrisy. There's a beep.
Oop.
Not sure what.
That's the hypocrisy alert.
From.
It's the John Boehner hypocrisy alert.
John Boehner has heard what's going on, and we're being shut down right now.
As we speak. Enough of that new wave, people. To Matt's point about companies that are saying things and versus what they're actually walking. They're talking the talk, but not walking the walk. Company I work for is owned by a larger company that is humongous in the industry that it's in. It's probably number one, and everyone else is, they exist, but they're not existent. That's how much of the share of the industry that the company enjoys, and I'm resisting saying its name, but look me up on LinkedIn, you'll figure out where I'm at. But nevertheless, the CEO of the company released a statement, talking about the times and how we are committed as an organization to, said all the right things. But I tell you, if you go to the company's leadership page or About Us page and you scroll through it, and it's like, okay, nope, no one there, nope, no one there. You don't see representation there. I'm almost certain that out of about 35 companies, I'm one of the few managers of color, and that's mid-level management. So again, to your point, okay, and like Nick said just a second ago, you're doing the right things right now. The spotlight is on it right now. And if I was you, it would almost be foolish for any company right now to not be pro-Black Lives Matter. It's almost like if you want to survive in this moment, this is what you need to do. When the light's not shining on you, what are you doing then? I think one of the benefits that we've had, oddly enough, is this pandemic going around. People have been forced to pay attention. It's kind of like, you had nothing else to do. You couldn't go anywhere. You're working from home. The TV's playing. So you couldn't avoid these things this time, because the same thing that happened to George Floyd is the same thing that happened to Eric Garner 6 years ago, I believe, next month. So it's what happened that changed your position this time. So I think a lot of it had to do with the pandemic. So I'd be curious to see how this continues to play out.
And that's a question I wanted to ask you guys, and Winzie, maybe you can weigh in too here. Why does this feel different? Why is this different? It was the main thing that jumped out at me looking at kind of prepping notes for this and looking at the history and looking at just even the last 10 years of the cycles of repetition that we're seeing here, and we've seen these happening. Yet this absolutely and the same as you, Cal, there was this feeling immediately that there was something in the air that this was different, but I was terrified because I'm like, I like, it feels different, but I don't want to fall into that trap of like, this is actually different. What is it? Like, why the pandemic is part of it, I think, but there's something more. And I don't know if there's an answer, but what do you think?
This protest, and this is how I see it, especially, with all the businesses and you see white people walking down the streets with their signs. This protest is fueled off of white guilt and guilt in general. It's because we've been telling you since Emmett Till and Central Park 5 that police are gunning us down and hunting us like prey, and you didn't see it. So now there's a 9-minute video of a grown man with his knee on another grown man's neck, and you're watching that life leave his body as he calls from his dead mom. So it's like people are like, oh my goodness, oh my God. Think about all the stuff that happened at nighttime, unfilmed. And with this, it's not just, oh, he had to stand his ground. A gun went off. We got the wrong person. It was the wrong car. He had a hoodie on. His Skittles looked like a gun. This a man on the ground,
handcuffed,
calling out for his mother, and people are feeling guilty because all the time they let this slip through the cracks, and all the time they trivialize this struggle, and all the time they just continue business as usual. Now when it's in your face and you're watching somebody deliberately take somebody's life, you can't look past it and like do that. Like, how do you sleep at night watching that video? Especially if you're a mother and he's calling out for his dead mother as the life leaves his body.
Which is not the first time that's happened in this exact same situation either, which is just so terrible. It's crazy.
But now you have, it's well lit outside. It's recorded. There's no Skittles, no hoodie, no CD, no cigarette. And there's 4 other officers. What is there? What justification is there?
And it's, you know, and it has been, I mean, it's been a create, like when we talk about getting rid of Facebook and getting rid of social media, and you get into these comment threads and you go deeper and deeper, and it's more unsettling and more disturbing. You're seeing
it's very dangerous.
The thing that is kind of like, and I do want to talk about some of the small victories we see here, but I think this time one of the differences is that there was a small and not a big enough population, but a small population that started to turn the corner in those discussions. And it was very little, and you had to kind of watch for it, but there was definitely that kind of knee-jerk, oh, well, he did a bad thing, and he was resisting, and he was doing this, and then the other one where where he was running away from the officers, and he grabbed the taser, and there were these things, and then you saw people doubling down to defend or to deflect or push it towards the worst of all words, to say all lives matter, and go through all of these things like that. And I just saw these small numbers of people slowly just like lose steam in their argument against the idea of like, no, this is a guy.
The argument against murder.
Yeah, Floyd.
It's really
Floyd
hard.
is being arrested for using a counterfeit $20 bill. That is his crime. That is the monumental offense that he gave his life for. And you look at
he didn't give his life for that.
Yeah, no, he lost his life for it, yes. But then you see white shooters that have gunned down a church full of parishioners, and they're lightly taken out of their car, and they're casually walked, they're patted down gingerly, and they're taken back.
Watch your head.
Watch your, and that's.
You want Whopper with cheese or without cheese?
Yeah, it is. One of my brother's closest friends from childhood, who's a defense attorney, literally broke down both arrests of Derek Brown, I think, was the kid that murdered committed the murders. I don't forget his name. We don't need to know his name. But John actually broke down how the cops approached each of them, and he hit on this one, just this thing that only he would notice. And he goes, the camera footage is from inside one of the cop cars, and there's just country music lightly playing in the background. And John goes, that was the demeanor of that cop as he pulled up to this kid who had gunned down a church full of people. There's quiet country music playing. There's not sirens blaring. There's not a squawk box or anything coming from the transponder. There's not. It's just he was casually drove up to this person with 5 other officers, probably one less than the number that pulled you over, Cal, and put you through that, and he is lightly escorted from it. And I think those are the things that, I don't know when it was for me, but I know that there was definitely a long time in my life where I stupidly believed if you don't do something wrong, then you're not going to have any issue. And I'll talk, like, that's from having the talk with my parents, just like when a police officer tells you like that. I had talks that were basically the cops are out to get you. They're out to get everyone. Little did I know that they don't really care about me. There's a whole larger community that's dealing with more shit. But there was this idea that don't do anything wrong and you'll be fine. Don't say anything. Don't, ask for an attorney, do all these things, and you're fine. And I honestly, it was an embarrassingly long time that I fought that opinion. And it was an embarrassing long time I also fought violent protests and violent responses to what's going on out there, and just saying I'm with you guys, but I don't understand looting. That is a all too stupid common thought. And those are thinking that I did.
I understand looting. It's free stuff.
Yeah.
That's why. It's opportunistic, and it's a lot of times not connected with the protest. It's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
But I think
it is a whole other conversation. And I got to tell you, when this first came up, one of the immediate things you saw on social media was, why are they tearing up their own neighborhoods? Now, where are they going to shop down? The people who live there, who are complaining about this injustice, now they don't have anywhere to shop. What about their grandmother? What about this? And I'm sitting here thinking to myself, and I almost found myself falling into this stupid argument or trap or whatever you want to call it. But that's your chief concern right now. That's really what we're thinking about. The Target has insurance. Target will be fine. And for years, people burned down things, and there was no outrage over it. I mean, we had crosses that are burned in people's yards. We had people that were burned, literally. So, I mean, our perspective has got to change. And then it's important that we don't conflate the two things. The people protesting are not necessarily the same people looting. The people burning down stuff were not necessarily connected to each other. So let's not tie them all together. There were many instances where we saw or discovered there's something flying. Hope you go away. Where we saw that, I guess that's something Matt's cracking up right now.
Sorry.
Hey,
there was something in the room with Cal, just so you don't think he lost his mind if you're listening only to the audio. There was a bug.
When there was instances, where I forgot completely where I was, but it's not just the protesters are not necessarily looting. There were a number of videos floating out there where there were literally white people dressed in whatever garments they had on, where they were deliberately writing BLM on buildings and on cars and things of that nature, so that Black Lives Matter or their allies or supporters would be blamed for these instances. I saw a video just yesterday, I think it was, where a cop is literally destroying his own cruiser. Literally destroying his own cruiser. Like, is this really happening? And you see instances where there were volunteers who were out there supporting the protesters, handing out water, and they get their stuff confiscated from them. But to the point of the looting thing, and then I got to this point, like, even if it is what it appears to be, there's a lot of frustration right now. There is a lot of anger. It's been 400 years of, we're not even going to pretend anymore, Now, and I'm not going to lay everything at 45's doorstep, but there's enough that could be laid at his doorstep. It's like, you've pretty much given a license and permission slip for people to go cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. And you tell them, knock them the hell out. I'll pay your bill. I'll get you. And literally you do that. There was a group of people, I think Oregon or Washington, that took over the park reserve or whatever it was a couple years ago, early in the administration. Yeah. Every last one of them got pardoned. And then just 2 or 3 weeks ago, he's upset because there are protesters in Seattle that created their own little city within a city. I looked at it, I was like, well, isn't this creative? We're making some progress now, moving in the right direction. Not sure who amongst them was charging rent or whatever. I think that was a little bit much. But he had a problem with that. I'm like, you can't play both sides of the fence. So I get the setting fires. But again, I'm not conflating the two. Not saying it was the same group of people. But there's a level of frustration. There's a level of just, we're over. We're done. We've tried it the right way. We've protested in peace. We've, everything that Dr. King said we should be doing, we've done. And now nothing is happening. You continue to kill us in broad daylight, and nothing occurs. We go down to Brunswick, Georgia, where the McMichaels and number 3 killed Ahmaud. I mean, literally driving him around, following him in a pickup truck. Who gave you the permission, the license to perform a citizen's arrest on someone who had nothing to do with these alleged robberies occurring in your neighborhood? You know what? I'm probably digressing, but George Zimmerman, We let him get off because George Zimmerman was allowed to kill Trayvon Martin without any results and have the temerity to sue the family? Are you kidding me?
Not just get off, but allowed to use his pseudo celebrity.
Correct,
Yeah.
and absolutely. I mean, he's auctioning off the Skittles and the gun and all this other stuff, and so why wouldn't the McMichaels think that they could?
If someone's allowed to do that, what message does that send? What does that send?
That's the point I'm making.
It's unreal.
Come on, and but for now, let's be very clear here. The McMichaels being arrested had very little to do with the fact that there was a tape. The police had the tape for 40 days? The problem is the tape got out. We were willing, or not we, but society, culture, police, district attorneys, prosecutors, sheriffs, a whole little network of people. It sounds crazy like a conspiracy theory, but we're willing to allow that to happen. But for that tape getting out, they would still be out, walking around free, as if nothing transpired, as if a life did not occur.
And that one, I remember.
Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I don't want to. That one in particular, and that was the two guys following around in the neighborhood, right?
Right. Yes, in Brunswick, Georgia.
So there's a guy out there that was running for sheriff, I think, and he made this big statement, and it was one of the most chilling things I ever read. And he goes, not a lot of people will notice this from watching the video, but if you live in Georgia, in this area, and you're a hunter, you'll recognize the stance that these two guys took. And he goes, there's one guy in the back on the tool bench. There's another one on the side. He goes, this is what hunters do with deer that they push out onto the road to scare them out into public. He goes, this was not a citizen's arrest. They were hunting him the same way they hunt an animal. And I think I think it's things like that I hope put those guys into the most painful lockup of their entire lives, to think about stuff like that. That's why having these videos out there get out is important, for someone to let that be known, because that's not something I'm going to notice necessarily, or that a courtroom might know. You get a lot of experts can get that opinion out to be like, hey, this is 100% premeditated. These were not men that were attempting a citizen's arrest. They wanted an excuse to kill a person, and that's what they were going to do. And it's terrible.
And it goes to and all of that. I think hearing these stories, and you almost don't even have to have the talk. Growing up as an African American, you almost don't even, the talk is not even necessary at this point. I see example after example after example. We had George Floyd, we had Ahmaud, we had Breonna Taylor, whose killer is still floating around,
and the report was the report was no injury.
Correct.
That was the report that the
correct. Yeah.
No injury. And the DA in Aurora is saying Elijah, was no injuries.
Yeah, exactly.
On TV. Sorry to interrupt. Keep going.
No, you're totally fine. It's important. I agree, and it's madness. So there's a level of frustration that occurs. I mean, what talk is needed? I turn on the TV. Oh, there's another one. Tamir Rice says, I believe it would have been his 21st birthday, Winzie, or 20th birthday, just this past week.
Tamir Rice would have been 18 and graduating with the class of 2020.
2020. Look at that. Yeah, I mean, in Ohio, within 4 seconds, we talked about the country music cop playing up, and that's why he's able to take him out. When you mentioned that, I'm thinking about Tamir Rice. Like, seriously, within 6 seconds, 8 seconds, he's killed upon arrival. What can you possibly assess within 6 to 8 seconds? And so this defund the police. I'm not directing the show, sorry. So there's a reason. There's a reason that these theories float out there, which, by the way, this defund the police is not unique to Black Lives Matter, by the way. Appreciate the credit, and I'm not a Black Lives Matter spokesperson, but appreciate the credit. But that theory or that philosophy has been floating out there for decades. And depending on who you talk to, it could be as radical as, some people think it is, or not as radical as some people think it is. But there's a reason that this stuff is needed. Police unions have way too much power and influence.
And
the fact that
just go on YouTube, just Google. It's all everyone can find out.
And wish that someone who commits a murder gets arrested. Just getting them arrested or indicted. Forget a conviction. Getting them arrested or indicted. We're wishing, we're praying, that something transpires. Like, it's exhausting. It's frustrating.
Well, and I think, and that's really, and Cal, you recommended this book to me, which was a huge eye opener. It's called The New Jim Crow: Mass Incarceration in the Age of Color Blindness by Michelle Alexander. She's a civil rights attorney, advocate, legal scholars. And what's amazing, so this book, she was writing this during the time that Obama was elected, around 2008. The book's released in 2010. She re-released in 2020 with a new forward on it that is so eerily just like, holy cow. Because there are a lot of things she talks about in that book before, which is, I'm very fearful of what happens after Obama, of what the response is to that.
Correct.
And what's really interesting about this book is that how tied it into this idea that we're talking about defunding the police and what steps we need to be making in the police department, and how that dovetails into what's happening with incarcerated African Americans in our country, and how that system has, and she calls it a new caste system, and she's dead on about this. They're basically they've made a new system to. We did civil rights. Civil rights worked in the 60s. The movement was successful. And then the war on drugs literally just circumvented everything that happened as a beneficial from the civil rights. And it put it so far buried down that you don't really even know that you're participating in the story. And we live in this world where everyone wants to yell fake news about everything so often, and it's the media and it's the news, and this is the government. Like, this is the government literally telling you African Americans are criminals in certain areas. You should fear them as criminals. That's what the police are being trained on. And then and it's the cycle. The police are trained to be fearful. They've trained the public to say, well, we don't necessarily believe it, but if the police say that they're dangerous, then we believe the police. Then they are meant to go there, and they're meant to go to jail, and they're bad hombres. That bullshit, and goes to prison, and then it goes in that cycle. And I think there were a couple of moments reading this, Cal, that just broke me pretty good. One was talking about, and it's just things you don't think about, and especially coming from a white male perspective. It talked about how you lower the poverty, right? You have the poverty line. You have African American men out of work, and they talk about that effect on their psyche and how it is there's a large amount of pride that is lost, and it leads to depression, and it leads to violence, and so that literally they create the narrative around it, and then the narrative becomes the truth. And you have violent criminals that are acting out because they've lost all hope of ever getting out of this system. And she talks about how the first thing that should be being done right now, really the first area to be focusing on reform, and it's never in the discussion necessarily, is what's going on in our prison system and how that is working, and how many non-violent offenders are in jail. And it's interesting, we talk about the police. I'm like, this is the other half of that story. And there is such a huge problem there, and there might be easier fixes even to start there. And then it would be beneficial for someone. I mean, I don't know what a white police officer would feel reading this book, but it was not. There were a lot of things that were brand new to me reading this, or perspectives that I just never put two and two together on. And I think that education, that is such an important thing, especially for these boys clubs. And it starts with people inside the police force. There are good guys in there, so fucking step up. Like, be the one that is out there that is saying, hey, I read this book this week. You should all read this book. You should have, you need to start changing your mind about these things. Right. Until there's someone on the inside, that boys club. I mean, Nick, you know we all know what it's like for that peer pressure bullshit, and dealing when you're out with a group of people that you don't necessarily see eye to eye with them on everything, but you don't want to speak up and you don't want to make waves. And I think we're at the point where that can't just be allowed to happen anymore. Too many people are, it's life and death at this point.
No, I mean, I've cut ties with some people in my life over this. And I think that, Winzie said before, the protests are getting bigger and bigger, and more white people, because now they're guilty. Now they're really feeling it. It's not guilty like, a scene. It's not white guilt like in the beginning of Get Out, where I would have voted for Obama a third term if I could. This is like real, like, oh shit. For the first time in my life, I feel like I actually have to do something. It's that guilty. And truthfully, when that switch goes off, when you feel like, oh, it's not a Jordan Peele movie. Like it's only a slight exaggeration for dramatic. Like that's the society we're living in. When that switch goes off, then you're in a position to educate yourself, and that's all. That's what I. That's what I want for our listeners. That's what I want for my white friends. It's like, get off your ass, and you have a supercomputer in your pocket. All the information is available to you. All the video of what the protests were really like, all of the accounts are all there. You don't need anybody else to do this for you. And you should do it yourself. And you should seek out this yourself. And if you don't, you're not an ally. You're get out of the way. Just get out of the way.
Yeah, because otherwise you're complicit. And I think that's really
You're more than complicit. You're actively supporting the status quo.
And I think that's a really that's like I said, and Nick has very much on our podcast been a voice of change and more outspoken probably than the rest of us in a good way. I'm not trying to say that in any bad way. I'm saying it took a bit of a push from you personally to me to even get to this point, right? To get to this, not that I'm not in it, and it's like, yes, I'm having these conversations personally in my life, but having this on, in a forum like this, that's going to be broadcast, it's going to be shared with other people who maybe don't have that perspective. I'm appreciative of that because you were not afraid to call out on something. And
look, the thing is, I'm still so uninformed and I still have so much to go. I read an article today, right? Look, all the videos of these altercations are online. All of the things that were the true catalyst for the Black Lives Matter movement are there for you to see. But today I read an article just by driving on the 405. They said, talk about whether it's at a Confederate monument or driving on the 405. That might be Los Angeles' biggest monument to racism. Because it cut through, they spent millions and millions of dollars to go around a white park. They bulldozed affluent black communities. They specifically designed, the highway that we complain about that's always congested. Part of the reason why it's so congested is the way it was planned out and how out of the way they went to destroy black communities to build it. Now, is that something that anybody, much less a white person, would know unless you dig in and do the work? Maybe not. But like that was something I learned today. Okay.
Wow.
There's a lot to be done.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, and that's not to say like, oh, hey, we've solved it, everything's great, moving on.
And if it weren't for Watchmen, would you have known about the Tulsa race massacre? I wouldn't have known. I wasn't taught that in school.
Yeah.
What do you guys think about like the fact that there was Jane Elliott, who's gone viral a couple times in her talks. Someone started off an interview with sort of gotcha question. She goes, "You said every white person is racist. Care to elaborate?" And they thought that they had her. And she goes, "Well, let me clarify. If you went to public school, like 85% of the people in this country, if you're not racist, it's a miracle." And when you think about it that way, I think that's another thing that absolutely needs to change is just our education system. First, we got to fund it. I wonder how we could do that. But we also need to change the curriculum. Yeah, where are we going to get the money? Who knows? Maybe one day.
It's not just public schools, listen, maybe we studied it and I don't remember. It's possible, but I don't know. I did not recall that moment from me. I remember certain things that I learned in history class, and you would think something like that would probably stick with you if you heard it. But yeah, I went to a private school, an expensive private school that absolutely should be. And I not just took regular U.S. history. I took it a second year for AP U.S. history.
Robin Williams was your instructor.
Yeah, that AP exam that gets you out of taking more history in college if you do well enough on it, that wasn't covered that I remember in any essays or any discussions in teaching that. And that is huge, is the education. And I know there was a lot of fear, and Cal, you and I kind of talked about this a little bit, that also we are leaning very heavily on our Black friends to help us learn better, and it's not fair necessarily to put all of that burden on you guys to educate us. And it does start with us. I think you're right, Nick. We have endless things that we can watch and learn and consume and get to. But sometimes it sucks that you have that burden. But it is something and I would never have read that book if I had not gotten the recommendation from you. I don't think I would have ever heard of it. I don't know if it would have crossed my radar at any point, right? And it's not the only book I need to be reading on this either. And that was the next thing, is I read that book, and then it's like, okay, what other things are recommended if you enjoyed this book? What else, where's my Reading Rainbow take me next on this journey? But I think that's super, it is such an important thing to keep learning. And I think that's
LeVar Burton couldn't make it to the podcast.
That's right. We tried to get LeVar Burton on. Cal was our second choice after LeVar Burton. No, I think that learning, I think the idea that I'm and it's sad. Why did it take me so fucking long to go and start researching some of these things? And why did I have to wait for an HBO show to teach me about the Tulsa Massacre and Black Wall Street? And why did I have to learn about Juneteenth on social media a year ago and be like, boy, I'm seeing this Juneteenth. What the hell is this? I don't even know what it is. There's so many things we don't even know what we don't know.
Correct. Absolutely.
And I think those are small steps. And I think that's kind of the last part that we sort of talk about here, is we are seeing small victories, right? And I kind of want to hear from you guys. What are things that you are seeing that feel decidedly different, as in there, not just a step in the right direction, but you feel that there is something that will be resulting from them, and not just a little thing that kind of happened? Do you have anything like that yet? Do you feel that is game changing, or are you still waiting for that?
For me, it's a combination of things. I'm still waiting for it. And I'm going to say all this, but there are caveats to it. We kind of touched on it at the beginning of this. How long does the momentum continue? How long does the steam keeps coming out? There is no doubt in my mind that this movement would not be as successful as it appears to be if there were not white allies on the side. There's no doubt in my mind. We could protest by ourselves, but without the white allies, I think the movement probably would have lost a little bit of steam. Because there's some stories, and go back to, as Nick said, you can just look online and find these things where, in the Baltimore area, there were these 3 white teenage girls, 13, 14 years old, that organized a protest in Baltimore. Come on. There were no black people that were on the steering committee for it. It was these 3 white girls that organized a protest that had 2,000 people show up for it. So those things like that are giving me hope. They're giving me encouragement. How long, we keep the support going is going to be critical. I was listening to a podcast earlier today, which I wholeheartedly recommend, Code Switch, really good podcast, overall part of my subscription, where they were talking about that most white people, 75% of white people don't have any interracial friends or no one outside of their race circle. So in all honesty, we talked about this at the beginning, that seems to indicate to me that white people amongst themselves are talking about it and are holding each other accountable / responsible. So I think that's important. Going forward, it's a whole thing. I don't even know if we will accomplish what we need to accomplish in my lifetime.
Yeah.
Just being honest, I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer, but will we ever get there? Because Nick talked about it, and Matt, you just talked about Juneteenth. Who ever heard about Juneteenth, Tulsa Massacre. The government literally dropped bombs from planes on communities. Where does that happen at? And it starts there. Education system has to be totally reformed. to Matt's point, you went to a private school and it was not in the curriculum. Nick, Winzie, myself, we went to public schools and it was not on the curriculum. I mean, occasionally in February during Black History Month, you get a week, maybe 2 days to discuss it. I went to high school in Boca Raton, and we were fortunate to have it offered as an elective African American studies. Like, you could choose to learn more about it if you really wanted to. No pressure there. So I took that course, which is where I met Adila, to answer your question, Winzie.
What was that class like? What was that? What was the Black History class in Boca Raton like?
It was decent. It really was decent. Coach Wendell Spann, who I believe coached the girls' JV basketball team, taught the class. The book was probably about 8 to 10 years old or outdated. But I think the people in the class really wanted to be in the class, kind of chose it. It wasn't like, okay, last choice type of thing. I'd probably say 85% African Americans in the class or minorities was probably the scenario. But I think we learned probably more. We went from the beginning of, I'm not going to say African American, it was Black Studies, period. Because African American, we would be talking about 1619, but we went even before that, way back, centuries ago. Up until the present time, which at the time was probably like 2012-ish when I graduated high school. So,
Sure. Yeah. Anyway,
they'll put a little disclaimer on there. Disregard that segment of the interview. So it was insightful. It was definitely that's where I think for me a lot of the education began. As far as appreciating my own heritage, my own history, there are things that existed when I was growing up that don't exist now. Black History Brain Bowl we used to have, where certain fraternities used to sponsor a brain bowl, and people literally spent, and churches and community organizations spent months studying for it and trying to learn history. And so I think we need to get back into those types of things. We need to make them a little bit more expansive. But yeah, it's going to start with the basic steps. Conversations like this, but it has to go one step further as well. Put your money where your mouth is. It's great that we release letters. Companies are saying the right things right now, but let's see it happen in your boardroom. I'd like to look at the leadership and see a little bit more diversity there. So there are some things that are giving me hope. Yes, the fact that we have not completely lost our mind, despite the president calling on the National Guard or the Army to DC to deal with protesters. God forbid they exercise their First Amendment right. Despite all the craziness, there is still hope. But then there's a part of me, like I said at the beginning, that is wondering how much of it is worth it. And that's just me being completely honest. How much of it is worth it? I mean, this is a fight we've been having for how many years now? And there's a part of us that we should be grateful for this bit of progress. Let that sink in.
Yeah.
This bit of progress is what we should be grateful for. Then I can easily become cynical. I have some friends who are like, screw it, the hell with it. Let's divide the country in half. You guys want which side? We'll get the other side and let that be that, and we're done with it. And it sounded crazy. When I first heard this a few months ago, like, she's really lost her mind. She really thinks this. Like, oh my God. And then, slowly but surely, it's like you hear more and more instances like, well, my gosh, you may be onto something there. This nation, as I told Matt a couple weeks ago when we spoke, this nation was founded. Governing documents where people like Winzie and myself are less than human or less than Matt and Nick. Does this nation have the capacity to get to where it needs to be to make me feel like I am a member here? Voting Rights Act, we have to vote on this. We're seriously, the Supreme Court has the ability to gut it and we celebrate something? I mean, well, what are we doing? These victories, while they're good victories to have, is like, we really have to do this? Why? What's special? What's different about Matt and myself? And not singling Matt out, but or Nick and myself. What's the difference? I was born here. So I'm not sure that answers your question, but it's a million thoughts. It's organized and it's unorganized.
when you talk about the rights thing, that's another divide that is so I will never be able to wrap my head around it. Is that you have these diehard right-wing people that are screaming about their rights, usually in the wrong way and usually not informed or correct or legal.
Correct.
But constantly this fear of my rights and what I am owed as a citizen of this country, and yet they don't understand you saying we didn't always have those rights. Like, think about that
Right.
for a moment. You're on this pedestal that you're not going to wear a mask because it infringes on your rights. Imagine not being able to vote because you've not been afforded that right.
That reality is very
have.
real if you live in Kentucky.
Yeah.
Very true. Absolutely. Just 2 weeks ago, or last week, yeah, you're absolutely correct. Or even in Georgia last week. I mean, you don't have the ability. This election was a surprise to you. It wasn't on the calendar 4 years ago that this was going to be happening. And
Yeah.
I mean, and even if we can go off on a tangent there, but the people who ended up being in charge of the election with zero experience. Yeah. But we're okay with this.
What over 600,000 constituents to
Yeah.
one polling place in Kentucky?
Mm-hmm.
Well, and Winzie, you're now voting age, so this is going to be your first major election that you're going to be voting in here. Do you think your peers see the importance in an election? Do you feel that that's not where the change is going to happen? That the change has to happen outside of that? What is it like for your group of friends discussing what's happening out there politically?
My generation, I think we've shown that we're definitely going to bring the noise. So we're going to definitely be voting
Thank
and
God.
knocking down Confederate statues while at it. But actually, I'm in a group with my college, and I'm going to college in Alabama. Just 2 weeks ago, the Klansmen were lining the streets.
Wow.
But there's a club I'm going to HBCU as well. So, there's no slacking, nothing slides, nothing gets by. But there's a club that's being created called We Matter Tuskegee. And we've been having Zoom calls saying, what can we do to get Black youth to vote? So that's a really big thing right now, because we know that America gets really upset when you mess with their politics and when you mess with their money. So we're going to take that route and try to shake the room. But my generation definitely, right now, I think I read something where the TikTokers bought out so much of Trump's stadium. So yeah, definitely.
And that's
They fuck with the last generation.
Yeah,
I think you talk about something feeling different.
Yeah, you're and this is a lot of weight on your shoulders, but yeah, you're the hope. When we talk about these small victories and things and what is going to change this, and how do you Callie, we talked about this little bit of progress. We're so happy with this tiny bit, and that's all it is just raising that bar just a little bit each time and making sure you don't go back below it. And I think that's the worst thing that's happened with this administration is it put the bar back down again. And I think things like cancel culture and these changes, taking down statues, the fact that NASCAR got rid of the Confederate flag, which I don't know why that is the most impressive of all of the things. It's such a stupid thing to be impressed by, but
because most people think that's the official NASCAR flag.
Yeah, that is a culture built around that flag to get that away and they know they're going to lose money doing that. That's huge, and I think it's things like that, and then hopefully the younger generation that's pissed off and wants to make their voice heard and knows their voice has to be heard. It's not going to probably happen in the next election or the next election after that necessarily, but more and more of those people coming up and more of the old white people dying and losing that power. That's the only stuff that I cling to for hope.
And that's what we can do. I don't doubt that any young person knows. It's not like they don't understand the gravity of the importance of this part in history. Of course they do. It's feeling disenfranchised, and it's having the system purposefully stacked against you in many different ways. And those are how we can help. And optics mean a lot when you take down a Confederate flag. When you
Absolutely
create
correct.
a society and a culture that makes it, oh, this is wrong. We need to use that same energy to fix our voting system and so that voters truly feel like their vote does count, or that they'll even make it to a polling location in under 4 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Whew.
Can I ask one last question?
Absolutely.
And I think, when we talk about white allyship, it's not your responsibility to tell us how to be out. We have to put in the work. That's my takeaway. That's what I want our listeners to take away. But is there one part of white allyship that you hate, that rubs you the wrong way, that is something that is not helpful? And maybe we think that it's helpful and we don't.
That, by the way, that is actually amazing. Because my last question is, what are the biggest mistakes being made right now in our reaction to the movement? Like,
It's probably asking how to be an ally. It's probably the real answer.
It's not
really
even saying what
is
can.
top of the list.
It's not even asking what can we do. It's literally saying, what are we doing that's actually fucking things up that we think is helping? Like what are we doing wrong?
Winzie? I'm gonna throw it to her. Yeah, I'm gonna throw it to her.
And I don't mean to be a loaded question. We may have done something in the course of this podcast. I think that part of it. Yeah, I think part of it is like you getting called on shit and not getting defensive, but wanting to be better. And I think part of that, maybe you don't have anything right now, but I think it's something that everyone should be conscious of.
Winzie?
One thing that, like, even when my brother presented this podcast to me, he was like, oh, I have white friends and they want to do a podcast and talk to us about our black lives. What the hell? I'm like, Caleb, that's between them and the God they serve. That don't got nothing to do with me. So it's like, and then when he told me it was about pop culture, they used to talk about pop culture, I looked at him really crazy because I'm like, isn't Beyonce like the biggest pop star there is and Michael Jackson the king of pop? How in the world they don't know about black people, Caleb? Definitely, like, it's like, because I had to go to
By
school.
the way, this was literally the conversation. I have spoken to Matt, and I think within hours of our conversation, I spoke to my roommate, and Winzie were on speakerphone, and I'm like, I walk in, I'm enthusiastic about this. I'm thinking this is the best idea ever. I'm like, this is game on. I had like 50 thoughts running through my head, pros and cons of it, and I'm like really trying to convince myself of why this is a good thing to do. And I'm thinking, call my sister, talk to some reasonable, sane people, and they look at me like, "Have you lost your mind?" So it was like one of those moments. Sorry to interrupt, Lizzie, but go ahead.
So it kind of struck a nerve with me because it's like, even in the midst of this movement, like, you're gonna ask of me. So it's like, I'm like, they're talking about pop culture, and all the people who are at the top of the pop game are black people, and even the people. I'm so glad Justin Bieber made a statement and said that if it wasn't for like black people being my blueprint, I wouldn't be who I am today. Anything that is something in music, art, literature came from black people. Black people set the blueprint. Black people is the reason Ariana Grande got this long ponytail and long nails in. Like, any fashion, music, art is black people. Another thing that a lot of white allies tend to do, and I had to correct someone on this, is fetishize the struggle. They make it trendy. They make it something that's cool at the moment. They trivialize it by making it something that looks good on Instagram. You don't need to record your right doing by the black community, because it trivializes the movement and it fetishizes people and is making it a Jordan Peele. Like, we have to pause the show. We have to stop that. 3, a lot of white people think they're being helpful by over talking black people. And that gets really frustrating too, because one woman, a white lady, at the nonprofit I work at, was saying, I agree with black people, but I don't agree with burning stuff down. And I've dated black men and I have mixed kids, so this makes me valid. It doesn't matter how many black men you sleep with, how many black friends that you have, the best teacher in life is experience. So until you are black, I need you to close your mouth and go sit in, side and let the black people run their movement. Don't tell them how to grieve, because black people are really angry right now. And we tried to show you our pain through music and through means that weren't tangible. But it seems that the only thing that America seems to care about is tangible. So I'm going to take my pain and project it on something that's going to make you see it. So if I have to light it up for you to see it, you have to see it. But definitely our white allies, don't overtalk, don't fetishize, don't use microaggressions to try to make me feel comfortable in rooms. Like, hey sis, hey girl, loving your Afro. It's really frustrating. And just take time to educate yourselves. Like, we had to go through 12 years of school, come home and educate ourselves. We had to learn about, I remember in kindergarten singing a dreidel song and doing nothing in Black History Month. I remember talking about Chinese New Year and doing nothing in Black History Month, talking about Anne Frank and doing nothing in Black History Month. We've taken time for our lives to learn everything about everybody. So at this point, you can learn about us. Like, and this is times when we didn't have anything, like no books, no Netflix. Yeah. Like,
we have the internet now.
We have the internet now. So if you choose to be ignorant in this day and age, that's between, like I said, you and the God that you serve. But I think it just struck me because it's like, they talk about pop culture, like Beyonce got all the Grammys and Lauryn Hill and the baby. Like, what you mean? Like, I just could not wrap my head around that. But I had to think about it. Like, when we started talking about culture and music and fashion, there's also segregation there.
Yeah.
Back to the school things, like, learning it in the classrooms. When integration happened, you have to remember that when integration happened, they're like, okay, we're downgrading education because we don't want the Black kids to be equal to the white kids. And that's unfortunate that you think, oh, I'm going to water down education. And when Black people were asking for, better quality education, it's not that they wanted to be with the white kids. They just didn't want a hand-me-down book. They didn't want a hand-me-down desk. So when you hear Black people saying, oh, let's stay separate, sometimes, and it's unfortunate to say, integration was the worst thing that could have happened. Because now you're in the rooms with the people that hate you. Like, and then when you're seeing, like, people painting Black Lives Matter on sidewalks or pulling people out of shows, it's just like another pacifier for us. We gave you integration. We gave you Obama. And the thing is with that, I hope my white allies, when the gas really gets going, I hope they stay in the car, because we've seen throughout history, even the white people get hanged behind Black people. So I hope that you know what decision you're making and don't get shaken up and be quiet. Like, don't let them mute you, because they will mute you. We saw that with Mississippi burning. Like, a white man hung from those trees too. So
yeah, and that's also why we are so appreciative for you guys to take time out to do this. And I think it was a real struggle, because I remember when I kind of said this to Cal, I said the same thing. I go, I don't know that this is the right thing. I don't know that even asking this feels it for me. The hardest part for it was that I just felt like if I wasn't hearing someone else in that discussion that was not me, and we're so insular in kind of our discussions in general, that I feel I would be missing something. And as educated as I can try to be, I'm going to keep trying to be better at that. And we really,
but as white people, we are capable of
yes.
doing the work, and we are capable of talking to other white people too.
Yeah.
I think that's also a really important takeaway.
But I do, guys, thank you so much. This has been incredibly eye-opening. I hope also for our listeners, I hope there are people out there that are going to hear this that have a new perspective. And I think that's kind of where it starts, is getting more people to have that new perspective, even if it's just a small thing. And that keeps it growing, and it keeps the fire burning. So I want to thank our guests, Winzie Wilson and Cal Charles. And we'll be back with our usual stupidity in a week with another episode. But I this is something that's definitely, I really enjoyed this conversation.
I did as well.
Like, I really, really feel like I personally got a lot out of it. So this maybe will not be necessarily so an irregular type of thing for us to do here and there. And I hope you guys absolutely come back and do a show where we do talk about pop culture, because I'm sure I'm missing. I'm definitely
useless, but
yeah, I mean, I'm definitely useless on the music.
You can pick the topic, Cal.
Kind of help on the TV and music. But yeah, I think it would be really enjoyable to have a more casual conversation and hear from you guys. So thank you so much for listening to this episode of The New Way, and we'll talk to you next time. Cheers.
Cheers.